All right, let's clear something up because this is one of the most misunderstood stats in modern history of politics. You've probably heard it thrown around before. Obama deported more people than anyone. Trump was the toughest on immigration. Biden deported nobody. Those statements get repeated nonstop, usually without context, usually without honesty, and almost always without explaining how deportation actually happened. Tonight we're going to break that down. Why deportation numbers were so high in the past, what border apprehensions had to do with it, and why the system looks completely different today. This is an opinion, this is mechanics. First, what do we mean by deportation? When we talk about deportations in official data, we're talking about ICE removals, not encounters, not turnbacks, not gotaways. A removal means someone was apprehended, processed, and physically removed from the United States. And here's the first key point most people miss. Before Donald Trump, and especially under Bush and Obama, the majority of deportations came from the border, not the interior. That matters a lot. Why were the numbers so high under Bush and Obama? Well, let's start with the biggest driver. Border apprehensions equal fast deportations. For years, the system worked like this. Migrants crossed illegally, Border Patrol apprehended them, then they were quickly transferred to ICE, and they were removed, often within days. No long asylum process, no multi-year backlog, minimal detention. This was known as catch and remove. Because the process was fast, almost every apprehension turned into a deportation. That's why the numbers skyrocketed. Not because the policy was harsher, but because the pipeline was efficient. The Obama-era spike and the part no one talks about. Let's talk about the Obama years, because this is where the numbers peak. The single biggest driver wasn't raids. It was something called secure communities. Here's how it worked. Someone gets arrested locally, any charge. Police take fingerprints. Those fingerprints automatically get checked against federal immigration databases. ICE places a detainer. The person gets transferred to ICE custody. You did not need a conviction. An arrest alone could trigger deportation. That's why deportation numbers exploded between roughly 2009 and 13. It wasn't loud, it wasn't televised, but it was constant. This is also why Obama quietly earned the nickname Deporter-in-Chief. Why interior enforcement looks different. Before Trump, interior enforcement existed, but it wasn't headline-driven. Targets included people with final removal orders, visa overstays, criminal convictions, fraud cases, but the bulk of removals still came from the border and local law enforcement handoffs, not massive workplace raids. That changes later. So what's changed under Trump? Trump didn't invent deportations. What he changed was focus and visibility. Expanded expedited removal, pushed enforcement further inland, increased public raids and messaging, reduced discretion and enforcement priorities. But here's the data reality. Trump never surpassed Obama's peak deportation years. Why? Because by then the system was already starting to clog. More asylum claims, more legal challenges, more court backlogs, more due process requirements. The pipeline slowed. Why the numbers collapsed under Biden. This is the most important distinction. Under Biden, border encounters skyrocketed. Deportations initially collapsed. That seems contradictory until you understand the system. Here's why deportations dropped. Many border crossers were released pending hearings. Asylum claims exploded. Court backlogs hit historic levels. Fewer cases resulted in final removal orders. Enforcement priorities narrowed sharply, so even with record crossings, fewer people actually completed the removal pipeline. Encounters went up, removals went down. Of course, we all know that. by the tens of millions, probably. Different metric, different system. The core truth no one says out loud. Here's the line everyone should remember. High deportation numbers in the past don't mean the system was harsher. They mean it was faster. Border apprehensions used to convert directly into deportations. Today, they often convert into release, court dates years away, or administrative limbo. That's the difference. There's one more piece of this story that almost nobody in politics is willing to discuss, and it's making an already tense situation even more dangerous for everyone involved. Over the last several weeks, instead of cooling tensions, many public officials and activist leaders have openly encouraged people to go out and film and confront ICE agents during enforcement actions. In some cases, local leaders are telling residents to record federal agents so they can use that footage politically or legally later.
Armed, masked, undertrained ICE agents are going door to door, ordering people to point out where their neighbors of color live. They're pulling over people indiscriminately, including U.S. citizens, and demanding to see their papers. And if you see these ICE agents in your neighborhood, take out that phone and hit record. Help us create a database of the atrocities against Minnesotans.
But that's just not what we saw today on the streets of Minneapolis. You can see the protesters are continuing to erupt here with anger. But when you talk to ICE agents, they say that they're being doxxed, they're being tracked, and they're being targeted here. We saw it before they even got out of the car today at some of these crime scenes. These people were out notifying law enforcement.
On the surface, that might sound like accountability. But what it actually does is turn routine enforcement activity into a public confrontation. It draws crowds, invites provocation, and increases the likelihood of clashes. Now, overlay that with recent events in the field. In January alone, an ICE agent fatally shot a woman in Minneapolis, Renee Nicole Good, during an enforcement operation. The incident has sparked nationwide outrage, multiple protests, and intense disagreement over whether deadly force was justified. Within about a week of that fatal shooting, there were additional shootings involving immigration enforcement, including a federal agent firing on a suspect in the leg during an operation in the same city, as well as the incident in Portland with the TDA gang member. Data tracking shows that over the past several months there has been a noticeable rise in incidents involving federal immigration agents firing weapons or drawing firearms, which correlates with expanded high visibility enforcement sweeps. These incidents didn't happen in isolation. They're happening amid large, highly publicized federal immigration operations that have seen thousands of officers deployed to local communities. Now consider what happens when politicians and activists urge bystanders to swarm these operations with phones pointed at agents. Operations become chaotic and unpredictable. Officers may feel surrounded and provoked. Every encounter, every routine has the potential to spiral into violence. This isn't just hypothetical. When crowds gather, tensions flare. In Minneapolis, some protests evolved into clashes where tear gas was deployed and individuals were arrested for obstructing officers. At that point, what should be a law enforcement matter turns into a political spectacle. And that spectacle increases the risk that an encounter ends in a shooting, not a peaceful resolution. And then everyone points fingers at each other. Officers blaming agents, officials blaming agents, agents blaming protesters, and politicians using it to stoke further outrage. Accountability requires proper oversight, civilian review boards, transparent investigations, independent prosecutors. Not crowds on the street filming agents in the middle of a high-pressure arrest. When you flood a scene with cameras and confrontation, you're not documenting policy, you're escalating the encounter. The escalation doesn't just affect statistics on deportations or removals, it affects lives, safety, and the willingness of officers to engage in enforcement at all. And the people who pay the price aren't politicians. They never are. It's border communities, local residents, and even migrants whose cases get tangled in political theater instead of lawful orderly processing. So the next time someone throws out deportation numbers without context, just remember who controlled the border pipeline, how fast removals happened, whether apprehensions actually led to deportations, because numbers without mechanics are propaganda. And around here we deal in mechanics. This is Behind the Line podcast, and this is what the data actually says.
It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines, this is your song.